All right, welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're going to take a look at a mystery that's really captivated people for decades now. It's the 1946 disappearance of Paula Jean Welden, a Bennington College student. And we're going to try to unpack the facts and the theories and really look at all the lingering questions that still surround this case. We've got some excerpts from a pretty detailed document about Paula's case, and we'll be pulling from those as we kind of go through everything. So are you ready to explore a case that, not only shaped law enforcement in Vermont, but continues to intrigue people all these years later?
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that really strikes me about Paula's case is that it seems like such an ordinary story at first. College student goes for a hike, but then it very quickly turns into this web of unanswered questions. And it really kind of brings to light the challenges that investigators faced back then. But it also shows just how much impact a single event can have, even on an entire state's systems.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. So Paula was 18 years old, a sophomore at Bennington College. What else do we know about her life leading up to December of 46?
Well, the document doesn't go too deep into her personality or anything like that, but it does mention that she came from a pretty prominent family in Connecticut. Her father, William Archibald Weldon, was a well-known industrial engineer and designer. He designed everyday things that we probably use all the time. Maybe even that coffee maker you've got in your kitchen, or, the toaster you used this morning. Who knows?
Wow. It's kind of unsettling to think about, isn't it?
Yeah.
This young woman whose father created these objects that are such a normal part of our lives, and then she just vanishes.
Yeah.
It really kind of makes you think about the contrast between the ordinary and the extraordinary.
It really does. And, that contrast becomes even more stark when we look at the events leading up to her disappearance. It was December 1st, 1946, a Sunday. Paula finished her shift at the dining hall and went back to her dorm room. Witnesses say she changed into walking clothes.
So more casual attire, not really dressed for a long hike in the cold.
Yeah, exactly. And that's interesting because, she had apparently told other students that she wanted to hike the long trail, that route that goes through the Vermont wilderness.
Which is strange, right? Because if you're planning to hike a trail like that, you'd think you'd be more prepared.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more intriguing. Paula didn't take anything with her that would suggest she was planning on being gone for long. No backpack, no extra clothes, no money. It's as if she just intended to go for a walk and then come right back. This decision to just kind of head out on her own is really one of the first big questions in this case.
So we've got an 18-year-old dressed for a casual walk, heading out onto a pretty rugged trail. And she doesn't have any supplies for an extended trip. It sounds like things might be heading in a bad direction. What happens next?
Well, there are a few glimpses into Paula's movements that afternoon. A local contractor, Louis Knapp, saw her and actually gave her a ride partway, dropping her off on Route 9. And from there, it seems like she either hitchhiked or walked to the Long Trail's starting point.
Wait, hold on. She hitchhiked? That seems kind of strange for a young woman from a prominent family, especially back then.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we can't say for sure, but hitchhiking wasn't totally uncommon at that time, especially in more rural areas. But it definitely adds another layer of mystery to Paula's story. And her journey doesn't end there. She was later spotted by a group of hikers who were actually on the Long Trail. They remember her asking them about the route, which kind of confirms that she was indeed heading north on the trail.
Okay, so she's on the trail, but as darkness starts to set in, things get a little more complicated. Tell me about this lumberjack, Fred Gaudet, who becomes a pretty central figure in all of this.
So as daylight was fading, Fred Gaudet, this lumberjack, who knew the area well, claimed to have seen Paula walking along Harbor Road. Now, Harbor Road is a section of the Long Trail that runs near the Faye Fuller Camp and Glastonbury Mountain. These locations end up becoming really important in the search that follows.
And I'm assuming this is the last known sighting of Paula.
You got it. After Gaudet's account, Paula just vanishes. It's like she just disappeared into thin air.
And I imagine people started to get really worried when she didn't come back to campus that night.
Yeah, at first her roommate just assumed she was studying at the library, with exams coming up. But by the next morning, it was clear that something was wrong. College officials were notified, and they started searching all over campus, but they couldn't find any sign of her.
So the local authorities got involved. What was their initial assessment of the situation?
At first, they thought that maybe Paula had gotten lost or injured out in the woods. I mean, it was December, the weather was getting colder, and the Long Trail could be dangerous, especially for someone who wasn't prepared. The county sheriff organized search parties. They had hundreds of volunteers, the National Guard, even aircraft, all looking for Paula.
Wow, that's a massive effort for what they thought was just a lost hiker. So when did things start to change? When did those initial theories about a hiking accident start to shift?
Well, as the days turned into weeks and they still couldn't find any trace of Paula, people started to doubt that it was just a hiking mishap. They began to consider other possibilities, some of them a bit more unsettling. And around the same time, Paula's family brought in the Connecticut State Police to help with the investigation. Two detectives, Robert Rundle and Dorothy Scoville, were assigned to the case, and they brought a fresh perspective to the search.
So now we have two states involved, a search that's getting bigger and more intense, and the theories about Paula's disappearance are becoming more complex. It sounds like the investigation was about to enter a whole new phase.
Yeah, things were definitely about to get more complicated. With the Connecticut State Police involved, things definitely took a turn. Rundle and Scoville. Those detectives, they had a tough job ahead of them. There was no physical evidence to go on. The terrain was difficult and time was passing. But they started looking into different theories, trying to piece together what could have happened to Paula.
I imagine they must have had a lot of different possibilities to consider. What were some of the main theories they were looking at?
Well, one theory, and maybe the most hopeful one, was that Paula had run away to start a new life. You know, some folks pointed out that she seemed to be in good spirits before she disappeared, so maybe she had been planning this all along. But like you said earlier, it's hard to believe that she would just take off without packing anything.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like something you would just do on a whim, especially back then. Did they look into whether anyone else might have been involved?
Oh, yeah, they considered the possibility that she might have had a secret lover. Maybe someone she met at Bennington or in one of the nearby towns. Maybe she eloped or ran off with someone, which would explain why she didn't take any belongings with her.
That's like straight out of a mystery novel.
Yeah.
Did they find anything to support that idea?
Unfortunately, no. The document doesn't mention any leads or suspects that would fit with that. They also looked into the possibility of an accident or foul play. I mean, the Long Trail had its dangers. Even experienced hikers could get hurt or lost out there. Maybe Paula had an accident and her remains were hidden somewhere in the wilderness.
That's a scary thought. But with so many people searching, you'd think they would have found something.
You would think so, and that's what led some people to believe that maybe something more sinister had happened. Maybe Paula ran into someone dangerous on the trail, or maybe she was the victim of a crime that had nothing to do with her hike.
Which brings us back to Fred Gaudet, the lumberjack, who was the last person to see her. You mentioned earlier that he gave conflicting statements to the police. What exactly made them suspicious of him?
Well, at first, Gaudet said that he saw Paula walking along Harbor Road as it was getting dark. But as the investigation went on, his story changed, and there were some inconsistencies. Later on, he claimed that he had given Paula a ride in his truck, which contradicted what he said before. And there were also rumors going around that Gaudet had bragged about knowing where Paula's body was buried.
Oh, wow. That's creepy. Did the investigators think those rumors were credible? Did they try to confirm what he was saying?
Yeah, they definitely did. They focused their attention on Gaudet, looking into his background, what he was doing that day, any connection he might have had to Paula. They even brought him in for questioning and gave him polygraph tests. But the results weren't clear, and Gaudet insisted that he had nothing to do with Paula's disappearance.
So, another dead end. It sounds like the investigators kept hitting roadblocks in this case. How did people react to the lack of progress?
Well, there was a lot of frustration, especially from Paula's father, William Welden. He was really critical of how the local authorities had handled the investigation. He felt that they didn't have the resources or the experience to properly investigate a case like this.
I can only imagine how heartbroken and frustrated he must have been. This man dedicated his life to designing things to make people's lives easier, and he couldn't get any answers about what happened to his own daughter. What kind of impact did his criticism have?
Weldon's criticism really had a big impact, and it was fueled by his grief and his determination to find out what happened. A lot of people agreed with him. They felt that Vermont needed a more professional and centralized law enforcement agency. Back then, Vermont relied mostly on county sheriffs, and they often lacked the training and resources to handle complex investigations.
So this one case, this father's fight for justice for his daughter, actually led to a major change in the entire state. What happened next?
Well, within 7 months of Paula's disappearance, the Vermont State Police was formed. This new agency had better training, more resources, and they had jurisdiction across the entire state. It was a major change for law enforcement in Vermont.
It's amazing that something positive and lasting came out of such a tragic situation. But the question still remains, what happened to Paula? Did this new agency help to shed any light on her disappearance?
Sadly, no. The Vermont State Police was a big step forward, but it didn't lead to any breakthroughs in Paula's case. The mystery remained unsolved.
And that's where the Bennington Triangle comes in, right?
Exactly. With no answers in Paula's case and other strange disappearances happening in the area, the legend of the Bennington Triangle began to grow. This term was coined by an author named Joseph Citro, and it refers to a specific area in southwestern Vermont where a number of people have vanished without a trace.
And Paula's case fits right into that pattern.
Yeah.
Before we talk about those other disappearances, can you remind us where exactly this triangle is and what makes it so unique?
Sure, geographically, the Bennington Triangle is kind of bordered by the towns of Bennington, Woodford, Shaftesbury, and Glastonbury. It's a remote, mountainous area with a lot of folklore and Native American legends associated with it. Some people even believe that the area has some sort of mystical or supernatural significance.
That definitely adds to the intrigue. But before we get too carried away with the supernatural, let's stick to the facts for now. Besides Paula, who were some of the other people who disappeared in this triangle, and what makes their cases so similar?
Well, one of the earlier cases that stands out is the disappearance of Catherine Hull back in 1936. Catherine was 22 years old, and she was last seen hitchhiking near Bennington, just like Paula. Despite a lot of searching, they couldn't find any trace of her.
Wait a minute, another young woman disappearing while hitchhiking. That can't be a coincidence.
It's definitely a striking parallel, and the similarities don't end there. Years later, Catherine's remains were found on a mountainside, but they never figured out how she died.
So we have two unsolved cases, both involving young women who vanished while hitchhiking in the same area. This Bennington Triangle is starting to sound less like a legend and more like a pattern of disturbing events. Are there any other cases that fit this mold? We were just talking about those eerie similarities between Paula Welden's case and Catherine Hull's disappearance. Both of them vanishing while they were hitchhiking in the Bennington Triangle. Yeah. Are there any other disappearances that kind of fit into this unsettling pattern?
Yeah, there's one that comes to mind, the case of Connie Smith. So back in 1952, just a few years after Paula disappeared, Connie Smith, who was 19 at the time, was last seen hitchhiking along Route 44 in Lakeville, Connecticut.
That's not quite in Bennington, though, is it?
No, you're right. It's a bit outside of Bennington proper, but Lakeville is still considered part of the broader region that people associate with the Bennington Triangle. And the circumstances are very similar. A young woman hitchhiking and then just vanishing without a trace, just like Paula and Catherine.
It's really strange. 3 young women all disappearing under mysterious circumstances within a few years of each other, and all in the same general area. It's hard not to see a connection there, don't you think?
The similarities are definitely there, and while there's no hard evidence linking these cases together, it has led to speculation that maybe there was a serial predator operating in the region during that time. But it's important to remember that that's just one theory among many.
Right, with cases like these, it's easy to get caught up in all sorts of speculation. What are some of the other theories that have been put forward to explain these disappearances?
Well, like you mentioned earlier, the Bennington Triangle has a long history of folklore and Native American legends. And some people believe that the area is like a vortex of paranormal activity, a portal to another dimension, or even a hunting ground for cryptids.
It's amazing how these real-life mysteries can become intertwined with folklore and mythology. But those theories are all pretty supernatural. Are there any more down-to-earth explanations that have been considered?
Oh, absolutely. Some theories focus on the environment itself. The Bennington Triangle is a rugged, mountainous area with dense forests, unpredictable weather. There are a lot of places where someone could get lost or injured and never be found.
So maybe it's just a case of bad luck combined with the challenging terrain. What about the possibility of criminal activity? I mean, something unrelated to the serial predator idea.
That's been looked at too. The region was pretty remote back then, and it still is to some extent with small towns and isolated communities. It's possible that these disappearances were the result of crimes committed by individuals who knew the area well and could easily avoid being caught.
That's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
It seems like with these unsolved mysteries, the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, that's part of what makes them so fascinating. They really make you think about the unknown, the limits of what we can know and understand. And they force us to consider all sorts of explanations, from the ordinary to the truly bizarre.
It's also interesting how these real-life mysteries have inspired so many writers and artists over the years. We mentioned Shirley Jackson and Hilary Waugh earlier, and how they might have been influenced by Paula Welden's case and the Bennington Triangle. Why do you think these stories continue to resonate with people even after all this time?
I think it's because they tap into some of our deepest fears. The idea of someone just vanishing into thin air is really unsettling. It makes you think about how fragile life is and how, even in places that seem safe and familiar, anything can happen.
And maybe it's the lack of answers, the not knowing, that keeps drawing us back to these stories. We try to fill in the blanks to come up with explanations that make sense of what seems impossible.
That's a good point. These unsolved mysteries give our imaginations something to work with, a space to explore different possibilities and confront our own fears. And in a way, trying to solve these mysteries, searching for answers, is a way of trying to make sense of a world that can often feel chaotic and unpredictable.
So we've spent this deep dive looking into the disappearance of Paula Jean Weldon and all the mysteries surrounding the Bennington Triangle. What's your big takeaway from all of this? What's the one thing you hope our listeners will think about after hearing this episode?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that even in a world where technology and information are everywhere, there are still mysteries that we can't easily explain. The Bennington Triangle, with all of its strange disappearances and those enduring legends, really reminds us that there are still things we don't understand, things that challenge us to confront the limits of our knowledge and accept the power of mystery.
And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's the questions themselves, the search for answers, that really matters. We've looked at the facts, explored the theories, and tried to make sense of it all. But in the end, the mystery of Paula Jean Weldon's disappearance, like the mysteries of the other people who vanished in the Bennington Triangle, remains unsolved. But their stories continue to fascinate us and even haunt us, reminding us that some puzzles may never be fully solved and some truths may always remain just out of reach. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and never stop searching for the truth, no matter how hard it might be to find.